My daughter buried me last Sunday. The coffin was empty, but she smiled like she'd won. And the last thing that happened will leave you speechless. I watched my own funeral from the back seat of a borrowed car, engine off, windows cracked, just enough to let the sound of weeping leak in. 100 people came to mourn a man who wasn't dead. They said my name, told stories about me, cried for me, while I sat in the shadows, breathing, blinking, alive. It should have felt funny. Surreal, maybe. But it didn't. It felt like watching someone else steal my life and sell it for parts. The church bell tolled. 6 times, slow, final, and there she was, Emily, my daughter, my only child, wearing black lace and crocodile tears. She held onto her husband's arm like she was steadying herself on the weight of her lies. When the priest asked her if she wanted to say something, she nodded, walked to the front, and placed a single white rose on top of the closed casket. Then she smiled. Not a sad smile. Not grief. The kind of smile people wear when the game's over, and they've already counted the winnings. That's when I knew it wasn't a mistake. She had buried me on purpose. 2 weeks earlier, I'd been in the hospital after a stroke. Half my face numb, memory fogged, trusting her with everything. She signed papers for me, said it was insurance, just in case. I signed. I didn't even read. Turns out, one of those papers was a death certificate. Another was a property transfer. By the time I got better, I didn't own my house anymore. And the life insurance she promised to manage for my care, she cashed it out. All of it. I went to the police. They looked at the documents, the hospital records, the signature. All real, all clean. How can we report a murder, they said, when you're still breathing? The system believed her story more than my pulse. So I drove home, or what used to be home. There was a realtor's sign in the yard. Sold. Her husband, Ryan, stood on the porch, smoking my cigarettes. He looked at me like at a ghost that forgot its place. She doesn't want to see you, he said. You're bad for her image. You're supposed to be dead. Act like it. Then he shut the door. That night I parked near the church. Watched them unload the coffin. Watched them hang my photograph. The one she took at the hospital when I was too weak to say no. Every ribbon, every candle, every fake tear was paid for with my money. I didn't move for hours. Just sat there, in the dark, listening to my own eulogy echo from inside. They called me a man of quiet dignity, a loving father, gone too soon. If only words could be buried as easily as people. Then I heard an old voice. Henry, my best friend from the factory. He was whispering to another mourner. She's wearing his wedding ring on a chain around her neck. I froze. That ring had belonged to my wife, Emily's mother. It wasn't hers to wear. It was a promise she'd never earned. That tiny detail, that piece of gold, broke something inside me. It wasn't about money anymore, or betrayal. It was about watching my own blood pretend I never existed. When the last guest left and the priest locked the doors, I whispered to myself, that's enough. That's when I decided. I'd attend my own funeral and trust me. The last thing that happened will leave you speechless. I used to believe my daughter would never lie to me. Now I know she rehearsed it. And the last thing she did before the burial will make your skin crawl. 6 months before that funeral, I wasn't a ghost yet. Just a half-broken man fighting for breath in a hospital bed. One side of my body refused to move. My words came out tangled. I remember the ceiling light buzzing, the smell of disinfectant, and Emily's voice telling the nurse, he's my father. I'll take care of everything. Back then, I trusted her more than anyone. She was my only family. My late wife's face lived in hers. Same eyes, same stubborn mouth. When she told me, "Dad, don't worry about bills. I'll handle it," I believed her. She brought me soup, managed the doctors, paid the nurses. Everyone called her a devoted daughter. But behind that halo of concern, she was already signing my life away. The nurse brought in stacks of forms: insurance, medical consent, property management. Emily pressed the pen into my good hand. "Just sign, Dad. They need this for your treatment." I didn't even look. My vision was blurry, my mind drowning in morphine and trust. Each signature was another nail in the coffin I didn't know she was building. When I woke up weeks later, the doctor said I'd been lucky. "Full recovery's rare," he smiled. "You must have something to live for." I thought I did. I thought it was her. But Emily never came back after that. The phone stopped ringing. The nurse said she'd paid the bills and left town. My accounts were frozen, my house deed transferred. I wasn't just forgotten, I'd been erased. The first time I saw her again was on a glossy real estate website. There she was, standing beside her husband, Ryan, smiling in front of my house. The caption read, "Sold by Hale Realty." My daughter had sold the home I built with my bare hands, the one her mother and I poured decades into. I drove there. The yard was trimmed, the porch painted over, but the air still smelled like my wife's roses. Ryan opened the door before I could knock. He looked at me like I was something that crawled out of the grave too early. "She doesn't want to see you," he said. "Why?" I asked. He smirked. "You're dead to her." Then he shut the door. Just like that. Dead to her. The words burned hotter than any fever. I spent nights in my truck, parked on the same street I once shoveled snow from, watching the lights flick on and off in my old bedroom window. She'd drawn the curtains, locked the gates, changed her number. The world moved on, and I was a living obituary no one cared to correct. Then one morning, as I drank bitter coffee from a gas station cup, I saw the headline on the local paper: "Funeral service for John Whitaker, beloved father and community hero." My own name. My own obituary. Printed like a bad joke. They'd staged my death. Claimed I'd passed quietly after a long illness. The date of death matched the day I was discharged from the hospital. Every word, every line, perfectly written to make me disappear. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because disbelief was the only thing left that didn't hurt. "They buried a name, not a man," I whispered. That evening I drove to the church, parked a block away, watched them unload the coffin. My coffin, polished mahogany, expensive, probably paid for with the same insurance money they stole. Emily stepped out of the car in a black dress, clutching Ryan's hand. Cameras flashed. Her mascara ran just enough to look cinematic. But what broke me wasn't the act. It was the prop she wore around her neck, a gold chain. On it, my late wife's wedding ring. The same ring Emily once said she'd never touch because it belonged to love she couldn't replace. Now she wore it like a trophy. I wanted to scream, to drag her out and ask her what kind of monster buries her father alive. But I couldn't. I just watched, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The priest began to speak. The choir hummed, and my daughter cried. On cue, with perfect timing. Even her tears looked rehearsed. That was the moment I stopped grieving. That was the moment something colder took its place. I realized revenge wasn't about anger, it was about truth and patience. She thought she'd buried a body, but what she really buried was her last chance at forgiveness. And the next time she looked into that coffin, I'd be looking right back at her. They thought they buried a corpse. They didn't know I could dig. And the last thing I unearthed will leave you speechless. After the funeral, I went home, not to rest, but to study my own death. The papers, the signatures, the lies, everything had to start somewhere, and I was going to trace it back, one name, one document, one betrayal at a time. The first clue came from a slip-up. In the obituary, the family contact for the deceased was listed as Ryan Hale, my son-in-law, not my daughter. He wasn't just part of it. He'd orchestrated it. Ryan worked for an insurance broker, small firm, barely licensed. The same firm that handled my life insurance. When I called their office, using a fake name, a secretary confirmed it. They'd processed a death claim 2 weeks before my funeral, paid in full, $680,000 signed by Emily Hale. Her signature curved the same way her mother's once did, elegant, precise, cold. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I just stared at that forged claim printed in black and white. People think revenge starts with rage. It doesn't. It starts with silence. That night, I drove to the cemetery. The ground was still fresh, the soil dark and heavy like wet clay. My headstone was already there, carved perfectly. John Whitaker, beloved father, 1958-2024. I brushed dirt from my name. It felt like wiping dust off a lie. Beloved father, I whispered. By who? The next morning I began digging in another way. Bureau records, notarized forms, hospital files. The paper trail led me straight to Ryan's office. He'd altered my hospital status from recovering to deceased, forged the attending physician's signature, and processed the insurance payout using a ghost account under Emily's maiden name. Every move was clean, professional, too clean. He'd done this before. I realized it wasn't just greed, it was a business. And I'd been their practice round. I found one man who knew more. Henry Barker, a retired mortician who'd handled the burial. I met him behind a diner off Route 19. The smell of fried onions mixed with cigarette smoke. Mr. Barker, I said, I need to know what was in that coffin. He looked at me, puzzled. A pillow and sandbags. Orders came from the Hale family. Said you wanted a closed casket for privacy. I slid $500 across the table. For another $500, can you tell me when they plan to lower it for good? He hesitated, then nodded. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. sharp. Once it's sealed, no one touches it again. Perfect. I wasn't going to burn their world down, not yet. First, they had to see what they buried. I spent that night in a cheap motel, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slow and uneven. I took out a box from the nightstand, Geek Out Om. Inside was my old wedding ring, the real one. Emily's mother had given it to me the day we buried her. After she died, Emily begged to wear it when she was older. I'd promised she could, when she learned what love meant. Now she wore a fake copy, made of plated gold. The real one was coming back to its rightful hand. I laid out my clothes. A faded gray suit, pressed clean but old, the same one I wore at my wife's funeral. Polished my shoes, shaved the beard that made me look half dead. If I was going to walk into my own grave, I'd do it looking like the man they thought they'd buried. In the mirror, I almost didn't recognize myself. The eyes were colder, sharper. Grief had been replaced by calculation. Every heartbeat felt like the tick of a clock, counting down to something inevitable. Revenge isn't about rage, I told my reflection. It's about timing. I folded the obituary clipping and slid it into my pocket, right next to the ring. Then, without thinking, I heard her voice again. Not the woman she'd become, but the child she once was. She couldn't have been more than 6 when she climbed onto my lap, curled her fingers around my neck, and whispered, "Daddy, promise you'll never leave." I'd promised. I meant it. Now, for the first time in years, I was going to keep that promise. Tomorrow she'd see me again, not as the man she robbed, but as the man she buried. This time I won't leave. Not until she sees what she buried. And what happens next will make her wish she'd never dug the grave at all. They said the dead can't walk. They were wrong. And the last thing that happened inside that church will leave you speechless. The bell rang 9 times as I stepped out of the car. Rain had stopped, but the air still tasted like thunder. My shoes sank slightly into the mud as I crossed the churchyard. Slow, deliberate steps, the way you walk towards something you can't undo. Through the stained glass windows, I could see flickers of candlelight and black coats moving like waves. My name echoed through the speakers. Today we remember John Whitaker, a man of strength, humility, and devotion. Humility, devotion. If they only knew what my family had devoted themselves to. I pushed the heavy door open. The sound inside cracked like glass. The organ stopped mid-note. Every head turned. You could hear the collective gasp travel through the pews like wind through dry leaves. There I was, the man they buried, alive, breathing, staring right back at them. I walked down the aisle slowly, hat in hand. The carpet muffled my steps. Some people whispered my name, others crossed themselves as if the devil himself had arrived. Emily stood near the altar clutching Ryan's arm. The blood drained from her face. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Then her knees gave way. She fainted. Ryan caught her halfway, eyes wide, frozen in place like a man watching his own crime play back in real time. The priest stammered, "Sir, God, this is highly inappropriate." I cut him off. I came to see who was crying for me. The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the candles seemed to flicker quieter. Ryan took a shaky step forward. This must be some kind of sick joke." I didn't answer. I just kept walking, straight to the coffin that bore my name. The flowers were fresh, the ribbons read forever in our hearts. I rested my hand on the lid, cool, polished, empty. "Let's see what you buried," I said softly. I knocked 3 times. Each sound echoed off the walls. Thunk, thunk, thunk. "You buried air," I said. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I grabbed the lid and pushed it open. Inside wasn't a body, just a silk pillow and a framed photo of me smiling beside Emily. They'd used it as decoration, like a product ad for grief. Someone in the back screamed. Another person crossed themselves. The priest dropped his Bible. Ryan lunged forward, panic taking over reason. "You're insane," he shouted. "You're not supposed to be here." "No," I said, "but I am." I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the wedding ring. The real one. I held it high so everyone could see. "You wore a fake ring, Emily," I said, looking at her as she began to stir on the floor. "This one still fits." The light hit the ring just right, gold catching fire from the candles. The guests leaned in, phones raised, recording. Ryan's voice broke. You planned this?" I smiled. "You planned it first." He charged. I saw it before it happened. The twitch of his jaw, the shift of his shoulders. Years of factory work had taught me how to read a man seconds before he strikes. He lunged with both hands, aiming for my throat. I sidestepped, grabbed the wooden cane from the front pew, and swung it in a clean arc. The crack echoed through the church like thunder. He fell backward, clutching his shoulder, groaning. People screamed. Phones flashed. Somewhere, a woman yelled, "Call the police." I didn't move. I stood still, breathing hard, heart steady. Then I looked at Emily. She was awake now, trembling, mascara bleeding down her face. She stared at me as if seeing a ghost that refused to follow the script. Her lips quivered. "Why didn't you just die?" she whispered. Her words hit harder than any punch. I walked closer, voice low, calm, cutting through the chaos, "Because you needed to see me alive." Her tears spilled over. She shook her head, mumbling, "This wasn't supposed to happen." "Oh, it happened," I said, "and everyone's watching." The guests were still filming, whispering, shocked and fascinated, like witnesses to a miracle and a crime all at once. The priest stood frozen, torn between faith and fear. I knelt by the coffin, looked at the empty space where my body was supposed to rest, and whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, "This is what greed looks like." Then I turned to the crowd. "You all came to say goodbye. Don't leave yet. You might want to hear what really happened." The air thickened. You could feel it, the tension, the disbelief, the taste of truth crawling up everyone's throat. Emily broke down, sobbing into her hands. Ryan tried to stand but slipped on the slick marble floor. The camera flashes lit their faces like lightning. Guilt caught in high definition. I straightened my jacket, adjusted my tie, and stepped away from the coffin. Behind me, the open lid gaped like a wound that refused to close. I turned once more toward my daughter, voice low but clear. "You buried me, Emily. You wrote my eulogy, stole my name, sold my life. But here I am, breathing, watching, remembering." Her breath hitched. The ring around her neck clinked against its chain. A faint metallic sound that cut through the silence. I pointed to it. "That ring doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the woman who believed love was sacred. You turned it into a lie." Then I slid the real ring onto my finger. Slow, deliberate. "And lies," I said, "don't last long in the light." No one spoke. The only sound left was the rain starting again outside. Soft, relentless, like the world itself was holding its breath. I looked once more at Emily, broken, shaking, silent. And then I said the last words before I walked out of that church. "You buried air. Now you'll choke on the truth." And trust me, what happened after that made every person in that room forget how to breathe. Everyone thought the chaos was over. They were wrong. And the last thing I revealed that night will leave you speechless. The church smelled like smoke and fear. People had stopped whispering. They were just staring now, at me, at Emily, at the open coffin that held nothing but lies. Ryan sat slumped against a pew, clutching his shoulder where the cane had struck him. Emily trembled beside the altar, her face streaked with tears and mascara. She looked small and smaller than I'd ever seen her, as if all her lies had finally stripped her down to her bones. I took a deep breath, the kind that steadies you before you tell the truth that ruins everything. "You all came here to say goodbye to a good man," I began. My voice echoed across the church. "But he's not in that coffin. He's standing right here. The real man who died when his daughter decided he was worth more in insurance than in love." A ripple of gasps swept through the crowd. Someone dropped a phone. I reached into my coat and pulled out a folder, the kind that smells like dust and consequences. "This," I said, is every signature, every forged document, every bank transfer. I tossed it onto the altar. The papers scattered like white confetti at a wedding gone wrong. The priest stammered, "Sir, please, this isn't the place." I looked at him and he fell silent. "This is exactly the place," I said. "You stood here and blessed a funeral built on fraud. So now you can bless the truth." I turned to Emily. "Do you want to tell them or should I?" She shook her head, sobbing. "Dad, please don't do this." "Don't," I almost laughed. "You forged my death certificate, Emily. You forged the doctor's signature, the insurance claim, even the obituary." She buried her face in her hands. From the back of the church, a voice spoke up. "I can confirm that." Everyone turned. A tall man in a gray suit stepped forward, the insurance representative. His presence at the funeral was supposed to be routine, a formality to close the file. Now his hands were trembling as he held up his tablet. "The claim was processed under Ryan Hale's firm," he said. "Filed using your daughter's authorization. I came here to witness the verification, but this..." He gestured at me, alive and breathing. "This invalidates everything." Ryan's face drained of color. "You can't prove..." "Can I?" I pulled out my phone. "You two were sloppy." I tapped the screen and a video started playing on the projector above the altar. The image was grainy, shaky, hidden camera footage from the hospital records room. It showed Emily, my daughter, sitting at a desk, whispering into her phone. Her voice echoed through the church. "Yes, I have the certificate. He won't last the week. Just sign and stamp it." Then she pressed her pen down and wrote my name. Her hand didn't even shake. The tsk-tsk sound of that pen scratching paper cut deeper than any knife. Gasps filled the room. Someone cursed. Another whispered, "My God." Emily fell to her knees, screaming, "Tss, stop it, please." Her voice cracked under the weight of her own guilt. "I thought you were dying. I thought you'd want me to have something. Ryan said..." "Ryan said," I repeated, "and you listened." Ryan bolted. He pushed through the pews, slipping past stunned guests. The doors slammed behind him, footsteps fading into the rain. I didn't chase him. He wasn't the reason I came. I walked up the steps toward the altar, slow and heavy. The ring in my pocket felt like it was burning through the fabric. I took it out, the real one, still shining despite the years. "This," I said softly, "belonged to your mother." I placed it on the small memorial table beside the coffin. "Not to your greed." The gold glinted under the candlelight, pure, unbroken, the opposite of everything else in that room. Emily sobbed, crawling toward me. "Please, Dad." "I'm sorry, I'll give it back, everything. Just don't ruin me." I knelt down so we were eye level. "Ruin you?" I whispered. "I didn't come to ruin you. I came to remind you what you buried wasn't me. It was every chance you had to be forgiven." Her hands shook as she reached for me, but I pulled away. "Forgiveness," I said, "isn't a gift you steal." Outside, sirens began to wail. The insurance agent had already called the police. Emily's sobs grew louder as two officers entered the church. They spoke quietly to the agent, then to the priest, and finally turned toward her. "Emily Hale?" one asked. "You're under arrest for insurance fraud and falsifying government documents." The entire congregation was silent. Not a sound. Just the echo of her cries bouncing off the marble walls. She didn't resist. She didn't fight. She just looked at me, eyes red, trembling. "You hate me," she whispered. I shook my head. "No. Hate would mean I still care enough to feel it." They took her hands cuffed her gently, and led her toward the doors. She stopped once, turned back toward the altar, toward the coffin, her empty masterpiece, and then looked at me one last time. "You buried your father alive," I said quietly, just for her. "Now live with it." The doors closed behind her. The church stood still again. Candles flickering, papers scattered like ghosts of truth. I looked at the ring one last time and whispered, "You can rest now, Mary." She finally saw what she buried. And as the rain outside turned heavier, I walked out into it, now alive, alone, and finally free. She buried me once. Now she lives with that ghost every single day. And the last thing she wrote to me will leave you speechless. A year had passed since the day the church went silent. The world had moved on, but I hadn't. I now lived in a small nursing home far from town, a quiet place, surrounded by wheat fields and wind that never stopped whispering. Some nights I'd wake to the sound of rain on the window and wonder if Emily could hear it too, behind bars. Every morning at 8:15, the mail cart rolled down the hallway. Bills, flyers. Then one envelope, no return address, just my name, written in the handwriting I'd once taught her. I hesitated before opening it. My hands shook, not from age, but from the kind of fear only fathers understand. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The words were uneven, like she'd written them through tears. "Dad, I still wear the ring. Not because I deserve it, because it reminds me what I destroyed. I hate you for not dying, but I hate myself more for wishing you had. Maybe one day I'll understand what forgiveness means. Until then, I'll keep visiting the grave, even if it's empty. Emily." I read it 3 times, then I laughed. Soft, bitter, the kind of laugh that hurts your ribs. "At least she's still alive," I whispered. I folded the letter carefully and placed it beside the ring that now hung on my wall. The same ring she once stole, the same one that ruined everything. It caught the light, golden and cruel. That afternoon I walked outside. The air smelled like rain and lilacs. Down the hill the cemetery stretched across the horizon. Rows of stone, each one holding a story that ended too soon. I stopped at my wife's grave. Beside it stood mine, the empty one. The fake grave that once fooled everyone. Now it was covered in fresh flowers, dozens of them, white lilies, roses, daisies. Someone had been visiting. The caretaker told me she came every week. Never spoke. Never stayed long. Just placed the flowers, touched the headstone, and left. I stared at the mound of earth, at the lie that had outlived its purpose, and felt something I couldn't name. Pity, maybe, or peace. "She buried a coffin once," I murmured. "Now she visits it every week." A pause. Maybe that's her real punishment. The wind rose, carrying my words across the field, and for the first time in years, the silence felt like forgiveness.